Donald Trump really seems to think that Vladimir Putin wants peace in Ukraine or Donald Trump to secure a win for the American president. Now, twice over the past 48 hours, Donald Trump has kind of reiterated this idea that Putin wants peace to support Trump and that Trump wouldn't do anything to disrespect Putin. Very interesting relationship that's emerging, one that's cause for concern for a lot of people, especially those in the intelligence community who know about Putin's background as a KGB agent, someone who has been trained for this for years. He knows how to manipulate people. He knows how to get what he needs or wants from people. And so here's the deal. Donald Trump is his mark, and it looks as though he's falling right into Putin's trap. Yesterday, during a hot mic moment before the press conference with European leaders, Donald Trump was caught on mic saying to French President Emmanuel Macron, essentially that Vladimir wants to do this.
I think he wants to make a deal. I think he wants to make a deal for me. You understand? As crazy as it sounds.
And if that wasn't enough, today on Fox News, Donald Trump went on air and proceeded to say that the reason he didn't include European leaders in the phone call with Vladimir Putin yesterday was because he didn't want to disrespect him. What about disrespecting the European leaders? And why did Putin or why did Trump not want to quote unquote disrespect Putin? Why would Putin even be disrespected for being on a phone call with other world leaders? Watch this moment.
During the meeting yesterday, when you decided to call Vladimir Putin, what was the reaction among the other people in the room, and what was President Putin's reaction to being brought into a phone call in the middle of your meeting?
Well, I think they expected it. I didn't do it in front of them. I thought that would be disrespectful to President Putin. I wouldn't do that because they have not had the warmest relations. And actually, President Putin wouldn't talk to the people from Europe. I mean, that was part of the problem. They had
stepped out of the Oval Office to make the call?
They had no communication with the White House for years as people died. Years with Biden and his people. No communication. Putin told me years. It was years that he didn't speak to anybody from the White House. And it was a long time that he didn't speak to anybody from Europe. No, it's a fractured relationship. And when I came in, I always had, despite the Russia hoax, which truly was a very dangerous thing for our country, but despite that, I maintained a very good relationship. I mean, you saw that when he got off his plane, I got off my plane. There's a warmth there that you can't, there's a decent feeling. And it's a good thing, not a bad thing. People would say, oh, that's such a terrible thing. It's not a terrible thing. You know what? We've got the most nuclear weapons in the world, right, and the most powerful. He's got second.
So
okay?
Can you describe?
I asked Susan Rice, President Obama's former national security advisor, former United Nations ambassador, about this and more. I am so excited today to be joined by Susan Rice, who previously served as President Obama's national security advisor, ambassador to the United Nations, served as the head of the Domestic Policy Council under President Biden. So great to be here with you, Susan. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. Looking forward to it.
Well, I just want to jump right in because you are one of the few people who have actually met Vladimir Putin and worked with President Obama back in 2015, 2014 during, I guess that was when Crimea was first invaded. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess, where we are today with Russia and Ukraine? What do folks need to know about Vladimir Putin, how he operates, and just generally speaking about the current state of affairs?
Well, I think the most important thing for people to understand about Putin is that he wants to take Russia back to its glory days of the empire. And that means that the humiliation of the loss of the Soviet Union uh, has to be avenged. And his goal is to take as much territory as he possibly can. He began in 2008 and started a war in Georgia and took a large chunk of Georgia, which he continues to hold. And then in 2014, as you mentioned, he went into Crimea and to a part of eastern Ukraine and continued to hold that territory through until 2022, when again he launched an invasion that was designed to take all of Ukraine, as you'll recall, went all the way to Kyiv and and tried to go beyond, and the Ukrainians valiantly resisted and pushed them far back. But the thing about Putin is, if you give him an inch, he will take a mile.
Mm.
And he has been clear that he's interested in Moldova, he's interested in the Baltics, he's interested in parts of Europe that are NATO countries. And should he get the opportunity, I believe he wouldn't hesitate to initiate conflict with a NATO country. And that would then mean we're in World War III with the United States. Having a treaty obligation under NATO has served us well for many, many years to defend any one member of NATO against an attack. All of us have to come to that country's defense, as NATO did for us
Mhm.
after 9/11. So the idea is that, Putin will not be satisfied. He needs to be deterred. And the only way to do that is through giving Ukraine the wherewithal on the battlefield to fight to the best of its ability and to maximize economic, political, and other pressure on Russia and its backers to raise the cost of this conflict so that Putin has to make a compromise, has to stop, and then put in place the kinds of security guarantees that can ensure that he cannot do this again in Ukraine.
Well, I gotta ask you, what's your take on the meeting at the White House yesterday with President Zelensky and the European leaders, with Donald Trump coming out of it saying that, there might be a meeting between Putin and Zelensky first, and then there could be a trilateral. What are your thoughts generally about Putin and Zelensky meeting first? What do you think that's actually going to happen? And then the second question is, do you think a trilateral is needed here?
Well, first, let me say that, yesterday's set of meetings with Zelensky and the European leaders uh, went, at least from the public perspective, as well as one could have hoped. And in contrast to when Zelensky was here before, and frankly, how he's treated some of our European friends on an individual basis. So, the optics and the tone were improved. The question is what of substance came out of that meeting, and it's really not clear, based on what we've learned so far, that much progress was made. He made a phone call to Putin in the middle of the meeting with the European leaders. He seems to be trying to set up some kind of bilateral between Zelensky and Putin. Frankly, I'd be surprised if Putin sits down with Zelensky. He disparages him. He tries to claim he's not legitimate. He doesn't see him as on his level. And I think what we're going to see is a lot more Russian rope-a-dope. What came out was, okay, let's have people meet at the lower level. But, Ukrainians and Russians, which has happened multiple times before, nothing new, nothing ever comes of it except potentially maybe some prisoner exchanges. So I think, Putin is likely playing for time. He doesn't want to get on Trump's wrong side, but at the same time, he wants to buy as much time as possible to continue prosecuting the war on the battlefield. So I'm skeptical about a bilateral. I'm skeptical about a trilateral, but I think perhaps there might be more prospect of getting there if Trump were sitting down with him. For Zelensky, he wants to sit down and have that discussion, whether in a bilateral or trilateral format. So it's something we should be pushing for, but it needs to be well prepared, and it should be preceded, Aaron, by a ceasefire, which is, of course, what Trump said he
Right.
was insisting on when he went to Alaska, and then he caved. He folded like a cheap suit in front of Putin.
Well, you talk about how Putin wants to buy time based on what you see on the battlefield. I mean, we really are at a stalemate, I guess, throughout the front line. I mean, there are some pockets where Putin and Russia has been able to break through, and then other pockets where Ukraine has able to kind of break through on the other end. But uh, I mean, how much time does Putin need here, right? Like, at what point does that kind of goodwill run out?
Well, who knows with Trump? I mean, Trump always moves the goalposts with Putin. I don't know how many times, I guess it's now 4 times that Trump has directly threatened sanctions on Russia and those backing Russia and has, whiffed. He's backed off, wimped. And so, I think Putin is a very clever, calculating player who seems to have some spell cast on Trump. And I think as long as Trump thinks that there is some play with Putin, it's like a fish on a line that keeps running away from the boat, and Trump can't reel him in. Putin's going to keep playing him. So and the Ukrainians badly need stepped up military support and equipment from the United States and from Europe, and they need the sanctions that Trump has threatened multiple times against Russia and China and India and others that are providing critical support to Russia. Russia still, with all the tariffs that have been levied all over the world, including against some of our closest friends and neighbors like the Canadians at 35%, the Russians have nothing. It's
Right.
go figure,
Well, I
or
gotta
you can figure.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think it's pretty stunning. But what's your response when people say these sanctions aren't working? Russia's fine. They can produce everything within the country, or they can go to India or China or elsewhere. What's your response to folks that say that?
Well, I think the sanctions have hurt. They have forced Russia into different habits of behavior and into different supply chains. These new sanctions that are on the table would go after those that have been critical purchasers of Russian oil and gas, as well as suppliers of equipment to Russia that can be used for military purposes. And I think they are very impactful. I think that's what sent Putin scurrying to meet with Trump and then get the ridiculous literal red carpet treatment that he received in Alaska in what was a humiliating fiasco, I think, for Trump. The threat of sanctions and the reality of sanctions, I think, is really quite impactful, which is why the Ukrainians want them, why the Europeans want them, and why Trump felt worthwhile to threaten them repeatedly. He
I
just
gotta ask.
hasn't followed through.
I gotta ask you, when you were in the Biden White House, did you all ever see kind of an off ramp? Did you ever see a true end to this conflict, or not really? I mean, was it kind of this vision of prolonged warfare for a long time on the battlefield between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, Aaron, I think as you mentioned at the outset, during the Biden administration, I was working on domestic policy.
Sure.
And so I really wasn't, intimately involved in both the information flow as well as the decision making on Ukraine. I was obviously during the Obama
Right.
administration. And, as you mentioned, that gave me a front row seat on understanding Vladimir Putin and how he behaves. He's a liar. He's a murderer. He's a vicious, you know, revanchist imperialist, and he's very dangerous. And to underestimate him, as I think Trump has on a number of occasions, is dangerous.
Well, you mentioned the Domestic Policy Council, and I do want to talk about some things that are happening domestically too, specifically what's happening in Washington, D.C. today, with the National Guard now being brought in from at least 6 states across the country to Washington, D.C. It, when you were head of the Domestic Policy Council, were there ever any discussions about bringing in the Guard or federalizing some kind of D.C. takeover to take control of the Metropolitan Police Department because of crime rates being out of control?
No, no. Aaron, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I've lived there virtually all my life. I still live there. And I've seen Washington through, some tough times, going back to my childhood in the late 1960s when, there were, violent riots that burned down the 14th Street corridor after Martin Luther King was assassinated. I've been there through the 80s and the crack epidemic and, when Washington was called the murder capital and we had a crackhead for a mayor.
Mhm.
That is not the Washington, D.C. of 2025. It is really a lovely, beautiful, happening city, well developed. There is crime, but the crime rate is way down. It is at a 30-year low, and it peaked as it did in many capitals or many cities rather after the pandemic, and it has come down steadily. By more than Violent crime is down more than 30 some
Mhm.
percent. And so, to claim and I live there, I know what it's like. It is at its best. And so to claim that, this is the moment where crime is so out of control that, federal forces are required is basically a lie. It's a ruse. And it's designed to exert Trump's authority over black-run cities. And that's exactly what he tried to do in Newark. He tried to provoke something outside of that ICE
Fine.
facility. Didn't work. He tried again in Los Angeles, came much closer. Thankfully, it didn't work. And now he's trying again in Washington, D.C. to provoke a backlash, to provoke violence that would give him the excuse to crack down and use harsh federal force, military force against the civilian population, and then set a precedent that he can replicate in other cities, particularly cities with black mayors and Democratic governors. So we need to be very clear what this is, and I implore my fellow residents of the Washington D.C. area not to take the bait. We should protest, but we have to remain peaceful because we don't want to give Trump what he's looking for. He's trying to provoke. And at some point, he's going to get bored. His patience is going to run out and he'll look for another distraction. But if we give him an excuse, I believe this is one step he may pursue to try to ensure that he and the Republicans remain in power. The redistricting ploy is a serious gambit to try to steal the midterms. He will continue down that path. Now, the threat to mail in voting, to absentee voting, and to discrediting the state run election apparatus is another bid. And I think we have to be mindful of the risk that if he feels it necessary, that he can replicate this kind of military deployment throughout the country in democratic urban areas, and maybe go so far as to try to declare martial law, uh, suspend habeas corpus, and then elections are really in doubt.
Hey folks, Aaron Parnas here. Thank you so much for watching The Parnas Perspective. Please consider subscribing to support our work as we grow this independent news media entity into something that rivals mainstream every single day. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.